and welcome to episode 69 of Book Writing Tips, quick tips for new and seasoned authors, and I am your host, Alba Arango. In today's episode, I want to go over how, as authors, we can use routines to kind of enhance character development. Now, we all have routines that we do every day, and I don't mean like you should dwell on these and draw out scenes that are probably not needing to be drawn out. But there are sometimes ways that you can incorporate your character's daily routines into getting a little more, not just depth to your character, but adding some quirky moments, some suspenseful moments, or even some tension between your character and other characters. So let's get down to it. Let's talk about routines. Alrighty then. Today's episode will be in two parts, as always. In part one, I want to go over some age-related routines, and this is, again, YA through elderly. Everyone's got a different kind of routine. And then in part two, I'll go over some ideas of other routines that you can think about that maybe you can add to your character development. So let's get down to it. Part one, let's talk about age. Now, this is going to be for basically everyone, whether you're writing a YA or if you're writing an elderly cozy mystery, kind of knowing some basic routines about your character. And I don't mean, again, that you should be dwelling on these or this is something that's going to draw out a scene way too long, but just little things that you can put in there that'll kind of make your character maybe more relatable or that people might not expect at all because that is not something that's typical of that age group. So let's talk about, in the first place, let's talk about sleep. Which is kind of a funny topic, but it's one of my favorite things to do. So let's talk about sleep in regards to like your character. So if you're, older like me, I'm 56, I'll be 57 next month. My sleep patterns have really changed over the years. Okay. Maybe yours have as well. But when I was a teenager and even into my 20s, I could sleep until like 10 or 11, no problem. Even if I worked all day or was at school or if I was in my 20s, I would, go to bed at like midnight, 12:30, get up at 5:30 to go to work every day. And then when Saturday came, Friday nights, I'd be out until like 1 or 2. And then Saturday mornings, I would sleep until like 10 or 11, like there was nothing wrong. And then when you're like in your 40s and you have the same routine, you go to, get up every day at 5:30 to go to work, you start noticing that going to bed at like 1 or 2 might be a little late for you. But definitely if you were like me, 5:30 on Saturday morning, I'm used to getting up at 5:30 and my body would wake up and I would grumble and grumble and grumble because I don't want to get up at 5:30 on Saturday. I get to sleep in, but my body thinks it's time to get up. So I'm just lying in bed awake and maybe a little Sunday would be a little bit better because I'd be like, well, at least yesterday I didn't get up and I'll wake up a little early, which makes it all the much harder to get up on, Monday. But that is the truth about when you age, your body gets accustomed to getting up at a certain time and it is harder to sleep in. And it's always so frustrating because you want to sleep in till 10, but your body is just accustomed to that routine that you have made. Well, when you're younger in your teenage years and in your 20s, your body isn't. Your body's good to go. You can sleep until 10 or 11 or noon and, your body is fine with that, even if you get up every single day during the week to go to school or work. So those are kind of some things that can make for some quirky moments. Definitely as someone is older and someone even older, like the elderly that are maybe over the age of 70 or 80, I live in a community where everyone here is 55 and older. That's actually a requirement to actually own a house in this neighborhood. And it is funny because if you do drive around at night, you do notice it is very quiet in this neighborhood. Like people are not just indoors. They're like, a lot of the lights are off by like 9:30. So elderly people tend to do that. All right. They tend to sleep a little bit earlier and up a little bit earlier. That's just kind of one of those things that is true. Now, that doesn't mean your character has to be that way, but it can mean that if your character is not that way, that it's different than most people that age. And that is a great opportunity to add some great quirky moments that your character interacting with other elderly people can have. And the same is true the other way around. If your character is an early morning riser and, now they've struck up a friendship with someone that is the opposite, that makes for some great moments that you can have between your characters, just kind of incorporating something about that routine into the story. Now, food, and you're like, why are you talking about food when it has to do with age? But if you are older, you 100% already know the answer to that, whereas if you're younger, you may not. But foods and medications, these are things that are a real life thing for a lot of people of different ages. Now, I am going to include young people in this as well. And if you're writing for young adult or if you're writing a kid's book, let me tell you about one of the realities of today that is very different than when I was a kid, and definitely different than if you're writing for an older audience that is like over the age of 60, like if you're writing a cozy mystery for the elderly. Peanut allergies were incredibly rare when I was a kid. Like nobody had a peanut allergy. I didn't know anyone in my school that had a peanut allergy. It's just one of those things that, yeah, you heard about it, but like it was rare. Nobody really had it. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches were like the thing. But nowadays, I think it's like 20% of kids have some kind of peanut allergy. And it can be like serious. Like some kids carry an EpiPen for this. And it's a very real thing where if you're writing a book about a mom throwing a birthday party for her kid and her kid last minute is like, oh, by the way, so-and-so has a peanut allergy. As a mom, you're like, oh, well, crap, I was going to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. No, actually, you're not. That could be a very serious thing. And it's very strange, these things that parents have to think about nowadays that, we didn't have to think about my age, people my age that had kids never thought about. But things are different today. Lactose intolerance is so much higher. It's so strange, the things that kids are much more aware of today than we ever even thought of when I was a kid. And so if you're writing for a younger audience, that's something to keep in mind because that is something that your character or your character's best friend, maybe a very real thing to them or something that you can use to make a moment in your book. Like your character has no idea about peanut allergies and, your kid character has no idea about it. And suddenly they meet a friend and offer them a Snickers bar. And, this is a very serious thing. And this could be a way to incorporate this sort of thing into your story. And that could add for character development and growth, both for your character and your minor characters too. So these are just things to think about. And of course, if you are writing for the elderly group, having to take medications is like a thing, right? I mean, very few older people don't have to take medications. Although I will say my brother-in-law's mom passed away just before she turned 98 and she was literally only on one pill. That's all she took. I don't remember what it was for, but that was it. My dad was on so many different pills and my mom had to keep them straight for him. All of these are very real things that a lot of elderly people have to deal with. And not that you have to that doesn't have to be like this defining thing about your character if your character is 70-year-old fighting crime or solving mystery kind of person, but it could make for a moment somewhere in the book where you can just kind of add that in there and it could create some relatability for your elderly readers as well. Just some things to think about. Again, not something to dwell on. These are just little places where you can add just a touch of something unique to your character or something that is maybe common to your character that can make your character relatable or make them different and a way to showcase something to your audience. All right, before we get to non-age related routines, it's time for the crazy law / writing prompt. And if you're new to the podcast, every week I give you a crazy law. And this is a law that once upon a time was a real law in history. And your challenge, should you choose to accept it, is to write a story kind of based on that crazy law. So here we go. This week's crazy law. In Homer, Illinois, it is against the law to use a slingshot unless you are a law enforcement officer. Now that brings up just so many things into my mind. One, I would love to see law enforcement officers using slingshots, but also what happened that they actually had to make that a law? So there you go. There's your challenge. Something to give your writing muscles a flex or give you a break from your work in progress. But let's get back down to it. Let's talk about routines. What are some other routines that your character may have that you might be able to utilize to not only give a little bit more character development, but maybe create a situation or scenario that can get some tension or some funny moments between your character and another. Here we go. Is your character a morning person or a night owl? And I will tell you, I have friends that are both. And any age doesn't matter. It could be young adult. You could be writing elderly. You could be writing in the middle. It doesn't matter. There are people of all ages that are morning people and people of all ages that are night owls. So I have two brothers-in-law. One is an absolute night owl. He goes to bed at like 1 or 2 or 3 in the morning and gets up at like 10:30. And the other brother-in-law is an absolute morning person. He's up by like 5:30 or 6, in bed by like 9 or 10. And they're, a month apart. They're both 70 years old. And that's just a big difference between the two of them. So which one is your character? And that, by the way, can make for some great exchanges between characters, especially if you have a character that's starting a new relationship or starting a new friendship with someone else. That is one of those things like, hey, yeah, let's meet for coffee at like 7 in the morning. And one of them's going to be like, I'm not in bed. I'm still in bed at 7 in the morning. How about we go watch a movie tonight? There's a good one on at 9:30. And it's like, 9:30? What are you talking about? I'm still in bed and I'm going to bed at 9:30. So that's a good way to kind of not just do a little bit of character development, but also forcing your characters in this new relationship to have to compromise and figure out how to make things work. All right, let's talk pets, shall we? Those of you who follow me on social media, you know all about my Beagle Pumpkin. We are always out, and now that it's been so hot in Las Vegas, we literally have to get up, or have been getting up at like 5:30 every day to take her for a walk, because it's just too hot. When it's 90 degrees by 7 o'clock in the morning, I have to get up at 5:30 to take my dog for an hour and a half walk. Thankfully, it's actually been a little bit cooler this last couple of weeks, so I've been getting up at 6. I am not an early morning person, so this is a big sacrifice for me, but that is one of the real things that has to happen if you live in Las Vegas and you have a dog that you want to walk in the summer, is you have to adjust for the incredible heat that we have. And so things like taking your dog for walks, taking your dog to the park, these are all things that are very real if your character has a dog. And a lot of people I see like to write that their characters have pets. And I don't blame them, because having a pet, kind of is something that a lot of people have, and that's something that is relatable. But you also have to think about this, okay? I remember one time there was someone in my writers group that had done this, that they had, they had a dog, their character had a dog. I don't remember what kind of dog it was, but that was a very minor part of it. It wasn't a major part of their life, but they had a dog. And I remember that there was a scene that they were reading, and it was about this character, their main character, who went to work that day, and then got up and walked their dog, and then went to work that day. And then after work, he went to have drinks with his coworkers, and then he ended up hooking up with one of his coworkers and went home with her. And then, the next morning, they got up, they had this sort of awkward thing, and they had this conversation. They ended up going to breakfast. And all I could think about this whole time is like, what about that dog? Like, you seriously had your character leave his dog at home for like 24 hours, actually more than 24 hours, so they went to breakfast. So that dog has been home alone all day, all night, and the next morning you haven't fed him dinner. You haven't, if I don't remember if they had like a dog door, if they didn't have a dog door, if they lived in an apartment, like realistically, you need to think about these things if you are going to have your main character have a dog or any kind of pet at all, because having a pet comes with responsibilities that, unless you want your character to be unlikable, you are going to have him address these responsibilities. All right. So that's just one of the things to think about. Can also add for some very quirky moments. They're having this really romantic, evening. They're falling asleep, and he's like, I gotta go with my dog, and that, is realistic and can add some kind of comedic elements to your story as well. So that's one of the things to think about is too. All right. What about exercise in the gym? Exercise is a big part of some people's lives. It is not a big part of other people's lives. It is probably a part of everyone's life where they want to do more and don't. And that's going to make for some great, great moments. Of course, you all know this. You've all seen the shows. You've all read books where, a new relationship is starting and the one is really into fitness and the other one's trying to pretend like they're really into fitness, so they go out for a jog and then collapse. And, this can make for some great moments. But that's one of the things to think about. What is their normal exercise routine or lack thereof? How about this? And I will end on this note. How does your main character prepare for bed? And that just sounds like the weirdest thing ever. But really, do they need to read to make them sleepy to go to bed? Do they need to meditate to get their mind at ease so that they can sleep well? Do they need to take a shower to elevate their body temperature so that when they get into bed, their better body temperature comes down and they find it easier to sleep? That was me, by the way, for a long time. Do they need to watch TV? That helps them unwind. Do they choose their clothes for the next day? I mean, all of that just sounds like these little minor things. But if you think about it, and of course you're not going to do this every single night that your character goes to bed, But it can be something that you incorporate early on into your book if this is their routine. And then when they do end up in a relationship with someone and they spend the night with someone and that person wants to cuddle and then they fall asleep and this person is used to reading or meditating and now they're just lying there in bed and they don't know what to do because they can't fall asleep because they're out of their routine. And so that could make for some fun and interesting moments between your characters as well. All of this is all just to tell you that there are lots of ways you can incorporate daily routines into character developments and create some kind of comedic and maybe serious or even, fun or weird moments that your characters share with other characters because you've established their kind of routine early on in the book. Anyways, all of that is fun and stuff to think about as you're writing your book, maybe even after you've completed your draft and you're going back and writing your second draft or your third draft. So some things to think about. All right. I hope this was at least a little bit informative and gave you some stuff to think about. And as always, take everything I say with a grain of salt. It is your book. You can certainly add routines or not add routines, and it's still going to be wonderful because it is your book and you are going to be an amazing author writing an amazing story, and I am cheering for you. But it is it for this week. Until next week, stay safe. I hope you are enjoying, if you are getting ready to go back to school, that you are enjoying time back at school, that you are preparing for that, and that you have a wonderful, wonderful week. And I will see you all next Wednesday.